we are always aware that a person's surroundings and the people who shape their world hold the power to mold their core personality, influence the trajectory of their life-changing decisions, and even redirect the entire course of their existence. Yet a crucial question arises. What happens when the pillars of this environment begin to crumble and become fragile, unstable? When deep internal pain transforms into seething anger, and that rising anger erupts into a devastating catastrophe? Nikolas Cruz was an example of a young man who spent his life wrestling with painful loss, crushing loneliness, and years of accumulated neglect. These negative emotions didn't fade. They gathered, swelled, and festered deep within him. And on the dawn of a tragic day, he made a horrifying decision to unleash that buried rage in a horrific event that shook the conscience of America and the entire world. But the most important point we must explore is this. What pushed him to the edge of madness? What force transformed a troubled teenager into a mass murderer? And was it truly possible for the world to intervene early enough to prevent this disaster? To uncover the answers, we must dive into the depths of the story from the very beginning. Our story begins in 1998, specifically on September 24th in the state of Florida. The child Nikolas was born. His biological mother, Brenda, struggled visibly with addiction and a long history of legal troubles. As for his biological father, his identity remains an unsolved mystery. After Nikolas's birth, Brenda gave birth to another child, Zachary. But the responsibility of raising two children far exceeded her capabilities. She could barely care for one. Overwhelmed by immense pressure, she made a painful decision to give up both children and hand them over to an orphanage, seeing them as a burden she could no longer carry. At this point, the Cruz family entered the scene. Linda Cruz and her husband, Roger Cruz, an older couple, decided to adopt the two boys, driven by the hope of giving them the decent life they deserved. At first, family life was relatively normal, but as the years passed, Nikolas began to display disturbing signs of violent and aggressive behavior. In stark contrast, his brother Zachary was a calm child, though he, too, suffered from psychological issues. None of them involved the overt violence that defined Nikolas. This contrast made the situation even more challenging for the aging couple. The problems grew worse, especially after the devastating loss of the adoptive father, Roger Cruz, who passed away in August 2004. Nikolas had not yet reached his 6th birthday. Linda Cruz suddenly found herself struggling alone to manage Nikolas, whose personality was becoming increasingly aggressive. Imagine a 6-year-old child already showing unmistakable signs of violent tendencies, an alarming indicator that something was deeply wrong and should have been addressed much earlier. Chapter 2: Disorders and Ignored Warning Signs. Nikolas began suffering from a range of severe behavioral disorders that shaped the course of his academic and social life. The most prominent were ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. These two conditions made him stubborn, easily agitated, and constantly ready to challenge authority. In his mind, everyone was wrong, except himself. Because of his misconduct, he was expelled from 6 different schools in just 3 years. Reports from each school described him with the same pattern: aggressive, volatile, and dangerous, not only to others' safety but to his own. This continued until 2014, when he was transferred to a specialized school for students with emotional disabilities. But even in an environment tailored for troubled youth, nothing improved. In fact, it grew worse, as he began threatening his classmates with explicit and terrifying death threats. His actions were clear warnings that he was capable of carrying out a catastrophe. One of his former classmates recalled, "His drawings were constantly disturbing. His notebooks were filled with skulls, guns, and dead people." Other testimonies noted that he was strange, withdrawn, and always had a look of simmering anger in his eyes. Most alarming were accounts from classmates claiming they saw him kill small animals and boast about bloodshed and killing. Despite multiple students reporting these incidents to counselors and administrators, no serious preventive or therapeutic measures were taken. Experts and doctors who reviewed his medical file unanimously agreed on one thing: he needed to be placed in a secure, closed treatment facility for rehabilitation. Yet this crucial medical recommendation was ignored by the authorities. As time went on, Nikolas became a ticking time bomb. Dozens of official reports were filed with local police, school administrators, social services, and even the FBI. All of them highlighted the level of danger he posed. But tragically, these warnings were met with either complete disregard or were brushed off as normal teenage behavior. Nikolas wasn't just troubled, he was obsessed with violence and influenced by extremist ideas. He held racist views against certain ethnic and religious groups, and his hatred extended to anyone who disagreed with him. This wasn't superficial hatred. It reached the point where he believed those who opposed him deserved to die. His obsession with videos of mass shootings was unmistakable. He even took photos of himself posing next to pictures of infamous killers like Eric Harris and Elliot Rodger, treating them as role models and believing his destiny would mirror theirs. His fascination with firearms was undeniable. He had deep knowledge of rifles and weapon models. Every day, both at school and online, he spoke openly about his desire to shoot students. At one point, he posted a chilling and specific message: "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." This dangerous message did reach the FBI, but it was met with the same familiar negligence. They didn't even bring him in for questioning, despite the statement being an undeniable sign of the catastrophe looming ahead. In 2016, while still underage, Nikolas posted videos on Snapchat, showing himself cutting his arms and announcing his intention to buy a weapon. Police and the school administration were informed, and he was taken to a psychiatric facility but was quickly discharged without real treatment. It was little more than a procedural formality, followed by release with no follow-up. Nikolas's adoptive mother, Linda, tried everything in her power to help him. She would call the police whenever she lost control of his behavior, and she struggled tirelessly to calm him and protect him, especially protect him from himself, as he posed a greater danger to his own safety than to anyone else. But every effort she made to fix him ultimately failed. Then, in November 2017, Nikolas lost the last emotional bond he had left when his adoptive mother, Linda, passed away. He became a young man with no mother, no father, and no stable home. He began drifting between the houses of friends and relatives. For a while, he lived with a friend's family, and despite knowing about his severe psychological issues, they allowed him to stay, and even allowed him to bring his firearms with him and keep them in the house. In that same month, another report reached the police, stating that Nikolas was actively preparing to carry out a school shooting. Following this report, he was permanently expelled from school. After a long history of threats and incidents, this is where the catastrophe began to take shape. In that same year, Nikolas was able to legally purchase an AR-15 rifle after passing a background check. While the world had no idea what he was planning, Nikolas was busy preparing, buying weapons, training, and nurturing his violent fantasies online. He killed animals as a form of practice for killing. He dreamed of joining the military, not to serve but to obtain a license to kill. He had an unnatural obsession with the act of killing itself. In the end, Nikolas decided that the defining moment had arrived. He wanted to become like the killers whose photos he idolized. He saw this act as his inevitable destiny, to become a criminal or an unforgettable legend. He wrote down his dark thoughts, drafted his detailed plan, and even recorded videos openly, declaring his intention to storm a school and kill as many people as possible. He stated it clearly: "I'm going to kill as many students as I can and become a real legend." And despite all this evidence, the authorities continued to ignore the warnings. Then came the doomed day. February 14th, 2018. Date known to most of the world as Valentine's Day, but to Nikolas, it symbolized rejection and loneliness. He even said, "I will turn Valentine's Day into a nightmare, not just for the school, but for the entire world." On that day, Nikolas was 19 years old. He put on his vest, prepared his weapons, packed them into a large black bag, and headed toward his former school, Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. Nikolas arrived at the school at 2:19 p.m., entered through an emergency door, and then pulled the fire alarm. While everyone believed it was just a fire or a drill, they soon heard something else: running, screaming, and the deafening sound of gunfire. At 2:21 p.m., Nikolas began shooting, and the school transformed into a scene of terror and bloodshed. After completing his attack, he dropped his rifle and vest, blended in with the fleeing students, and managed to escape. He then walked to a Walmart store, bought a drink, and calmly sipped it, as if he hadn't just murdered 17 innocent people, most of them young students. Afterward, he went to a McDonald's and quietly ate a meal. It didn't take long for the police to identify him, thanks to surveillance footage. They were able to track him down and arrest him quickly. His arrest was bizarre. He surrendered quietly and showed no resistance. At the police station, even before the interrogation began, Nikolas started displaying unstable behavior. He covered his ears and began mumbling to himself, as if speaking to an internal voice guiding him. At times he cried, and at other times he burst into unsettling, hysterical laughter. When asked why he chose Valentine's Day, his response revealed the depth of his isolation. "No one loves me. Valentine's Day is the worst day of my life." He admitted that he had planned the attack for months, and that his goal was to kill as many students as possible to become a legend. But the most chilling moment came when he told investigators, in a calm and terrifying tone, "I know I'm going to spend my whole life in prison, and I accept that." Nikolas Cruz left behind 17 dead victims and 17 wounded. He was charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder, and the prosecution sought the death penalty. However, the court rejected the death sentence. The defense team focused on seeking mercy, arguing that Nikolas was a victim of mental illness and a traumatic history. During one of the court sessions, defense attorney Melissa McNeil made an inappropriate gesture, raising an obscene hand sign right in front of the cameras and the victims' families. This action caused widespread outrage and was considered an insult to the memory of those who were killed. Nikolas continued to show how dangerous he was even behind bars. He attacked an officer after being warned, which led to an additional charge of aggravated assault on a government employee. On November 2nd, 2022, the final verdict was issued. Life imprisonment 34 times, one for each person, killed or injured, along with an additional 26 years for the assault. The reaction from the public and the victims' families was overwhelmingly angry. One victim's mother stood up and said, "I hope your life is torn apart by pain every single minute." Many felt that the justice system had diminished the value of the 17 lives that were lost. Lessons learned. We reach a crossroads. Some see Nikolas as a victim of a society that failed to contain him and failed to treat him. Others see him as a criminal who consciously chose to kill. The truth is, this story is tragic and painful from every angle. But we cannot overlook the importance of mental health, combating bullying, and the dangers of family neglect. These factors have the power to push anyone toward the edge and turn them into something destructive. The final lesson: care, support, and help are keys that can save lives. We must pay attention to the people around us and never underestimate any warning sign or cry for help, even if it is silent or indirect.